Good evening. My name is Tim Flynn, and I'm the mayor of the city of Oxnard. This evening's Facebook Live broadcast is the 15th that I've done since the beginning of the coronavirus. And I really want to thank you now for sharing this broadcast and later the video with your friends. It helps disseminate the information. So I do have a full program this evening, and I apologize. Last week I went on 45 minutes, so tonight I'm going to try to keep it to 30 minutes, and if there's time, I'll answer and or take some of your questions. So the very first thing I'd like to talk about this evening is that on July 1st of this past week, on Wednesday, the city of Oxnard had its very first town hall meeting on the subject of policing and racism. And that panel discussion was virtual, so it wasn't a gathering at City Hall. It was a virtual meeting, was moderated by the city manager, Alexander Nguyen, and it had a series of panelists, and it was, for me personally, a very, not shocking presentation, but it was very revealing, and I wanted to have a chance just to more or less summarize what in fact happened. So the three things, though, that I took away from this very first community discussion, I know there are many community discussions that have taken place, but first community discussion sponsored by the city of Oxnard are three things. Number one, that there is a pervasiveness of profiling when it comes to policing. That doesn't necessarily mean just the city of Oxnard, just overall with policing, that there's a pervasiveness of profiling, and I'll get into that in a second. Number two, this, according to Police Chief Scott Whitney, the state of California leads the rest of the nation when it comes to reforms on policing. And number three, Chief Whitney has taken this tragedy that occurred several weeks ago and taken it as a learning experience and an opportunity to grow and to make changes right here in the city of Oxnard. So I'll be talking about all three. So let me talk very quickly about the panelists. So on this panel, there was the police chief, there was a defense lawyer, an attorney, a retired Oxnard police commander, a cultural and community services director, works currently for the city of Oxnard, a retired probation officer, the head of the NAACP chapter here in Ventura County, a former president and youth director of the council, of the Youth Directors Council of the Police Activities League. So all of these individuals were given a chance to have opening comments and talk a little bit about their relationship with either policing or the police. And one of the things that I've been aware of for some time, and I think most of us have been aware of, is that people have said for some time that there's a lot of profiling that goes on with policing. And these panelists seem to confirm that, and that's the very first thing that I learned. Not that profiling doesn't take place, but that it is pervasive. So let me just go into a few of the comments. So one of the very first people that spoke is now a retired police commander. Somebody I have a lot of high regard for and a lot of respect for, and he's still active even today in the Youth League and the Police Activities League. He's very active in the city since his retirement as a commander. And he spoke of something that it was one of his very first memories of anything to do with policing, and it was actually his father, who was the very first African American to serve on the Oxnard Police Department. And it was pretty unsettling what he had to say. And again, I don't know the exact time frame. I presume his father started with the police department in the 1960s, could have been the late 1960s. And one of the very first conversations that his father heard when he entered the police station with his uniform was comments by officers making derogatory comments. And I don't want to repeat what those comments were, but they were very unsettling. Certainly we know that that kind of behavior is not acceptable, and it's not acceptable today, and it hasn't been acceptable for some time, but we can say, at least for one police commander, that was his initial experience at learning from his father and through his parents at the dinner table what in fact happened when his father first started with the Oxnard Police Department. So that kind of set a little bit of a historical perspective. But he had a lot of other very valid things to say. He had good things to say, by the way, about police resource officers. Those are police officers on campuses, high school campuses and elementary school campuses. But most recently, many of those contracts were canceled with the Oxnard Police Department due to a lack of funding. There was a former youth director who actually worked for the Police Activities League. The Police Activities League, as we know, operates out of Bannister Gym. Right now that's being used as a homeless shelter. But prior to COVID-19, the PAL Gym, as it's referred to, is a police youth activities league. And this young lady, who is a recent graduate, she was very young, was actually in a leadership position. She was a former youth director of the Police Activities League. She talked on the one hand about her very positive relationships that she had both with the police department and in her time working with the Police Activities League. But she also spoke about just coming from a neighborhood in the city of Oxnard where she grew up fearing the police and learning to fear the police, and talked about what effect that actually had on her and what her ideas were to remedy that. There was another person who was a defense lawyer, and this was very unsettling. This is a young man who works for the Public Defender's Office of Ventura County, and he quite often has been mistaken as a defendant in the courtroom when in fact he was there actually representing clients. So the presumption was, according to him, I'm just talking about what he had to say, is that he was in the courtroom, he was dressed in a suit, but the presumption, perhaps by the juries and certain other people in the courtroom, is that he actually was a defendant. He also spoke of the fact that by wearing a suit and tie, he was treated a lot better. Well, I think most people can say if they dress up, they're going to be treated better. But for him, the sense was it was almost like a uniform. And I can confirm that isn't unique just to him. I have a very good friend who works as a United States attorney. And I asked him just about a year ago, why is it that even when we're out having dinner or socializing, that you're always wearing a tie, you're always wearing a suit? And he told me that it was so that he would be treated better, and in particular so that he wouldn't be pulled over by the police. And in fact, he had or has been pulled over by the police on many occasions. He happens to be married to a white woman, and in many instances, she has told me this, that her impression is that the police, in pulling him over, might have thought that she was in the car against her will, when this, in fact, was her husband. So just to confirm that, the head of the NAACP spoke about an experience that her daughter had, and there was also an attorney that spoke in a very similar way, that when her daughter was recently pulled over by the police, the very first question that the police asked her daughter was, are you on probation, are you on parole, etc. And another lawyer that served on this panel also discussed that similar questions were asked of them. Now I can say that probably because, thank goodness it's only because of traffic tickets, that I've been pulled over by the police before, and I've never been asked those questions, and I've always been treated well. But sometimes I question whether my appearance has anything to do with the fact that I am treated well. And this has nothing to do with being on the city council. I'm talking about as a youth and growing up here in the city of Oxnard. I was always treated really well by the police. But what is of particular concern to me is that for many people, I think the discussion has been, well, things aren't the way they were in the 1960s, or things aren't the way they were in the 1970s. Things have changed. And I think that all of us can agree that things have changed, and that things have changed in a very positive way. But I think it's also important for us to acknowledge the fact that for many people of color, and when I say people of color, I'm not just talking about African Americans, but also Hispanics and others, there does seem to be a double standard of treatment. So that was, for me, very enlightening. It wasn't the fact that profiling is taking place, it was how pervasive that each and every one of these individuals had a story to tell about profiling. Next, Chief Whitney, when it was his turn to speak, he spoke about the fact that the state of California is at the cutting edge of reforms and has led, in fact, the rest of the nation. But he saw, as I mentioned in the beginning of this broadcast, that this whole experience with George Floyd, he said, number one, that the police department and the city of Oxnard was not going to shy away from it. It was going to take it and meet it head on, and that he personally saw, and the leadership of the police department, as well as the city, sees this as an opportunity to learn from this experience and to grow. So one of the main issues of contention, and this unfortunately were the circumstances behind the death of George Floyd, is the use of police with a suspect and restraining a suspect of restraining them through the carotid artery. Just to explain that, all people have two carotid arteries, and there's an internal and an external artery. The external ones control the face and the neck, and the internal carotid artery controls oxygen to the brain. And of course, the other one also provides oxygen. And what we saw with the grotesque death of George Floyd is the fact that an officer was kneeling on his neck, on his carotid artery, and that's what eventually killed him, because it cut off oxygen to his brain. So the Oxnard Police Department is recommending a ban of this carotid restraint, as it is called, unless an officer's life is in direct danger. Now, state law might trump that local reform, but Chief Whitney felt that it was a mistake to completely eliminate the carotid restraint, but only in the most extreme of circumstances. If it's a life and death situation of a police officer, should and or can it be used. Also, reforms that Chief Whitney is leading in his department are the duty to intercede and to report. So there were officers standing by watching as Mr. Floyd, in that 8-minute and 40-some second period, eventually was asphyxiated, and he was killed by this officer kneeling on his neck. That there were other officers that actually were there and present. And with these new reforms that Chief Whitney is putting through, there would be a duty of fellow officers under certain circumstances to intercede and to actually report occurrences of this nature. Also, there's a move to train officers on de-escalation techniques. And not that that hasn't already taken place, because we see in many instances in the Oxnard Police Department, it's a very difficult job, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm not making excuses for the police department. I'm stating the fact that there's no one that argues that the police department's job isn't difficult. And when they encounter individuals that might, due to mental health problems, it could be a domestic dispute, it could be due to a variety of reasons. When they encounter those individuals, it's a very stressful event, and they have to have the skills and the training and the techniques to de-escalate a situation. And we've seen that play out across the nation, where in some instances, police officers use de-escalation techniques in the very beginning, but they're not successful, and of course it leads to further action and can potentially lead to the death or the injury of the suspect, or for that matter, the death or the injury of the police officer. And that's very important to note, the difficult position that police officers all across this country face when they're dealing with individuals. And the last item, and there are many other areas that Chief Whitney is looking for these reforms, is better training for the police department, constantly a self-improvement process. So that was really what I gathered from this very first community conversation. But I wanted to kind of take from that first conversation, and I wanted to kind of reemphasize this belief that I have about the need for people to interact, for people to engage in a conversation. And this morning I read an article in the Ventura County Star, and it was about an individual serving on a city council in the county of Ventura. And she had made a remark to individuals that were calling for the defunding of the police department in that city, and made a reference to where the people had came from. And she had mentioned that the comments were coming from a barrio. And that individual and that person on the city council then was addressed by another person on the city council who actually wrote, according to the paper, an article to the Ventura County Star, more or less saying that in the context in which this member of the city council used this terminology, that it was offensive. And one of the things that I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that's really important is that, number one, it's going to take a lot of leadership, both on the local level, state, and federal level, for leaders to encourage people to communicate with each other. And so one of the things that I think quite often derails communication is when people are speaking at someone rather than with someone. And just a thought that I wanted to leave my viewers here in the city of Oxnard with today as we go forward to the next steps. The panel discussion was not a communication with any one or set person. There was a moderator, and the individualist, the panelist who served on this conversation, the very first of these conversations, they were speaking about their personal experiences and their beliefs, but it wasn't necessarily engaging back and forth a conversation. And so I think leadership is extremely important at getting people to speak with and to communicate with each other rather than speaking at someone. And oftentimes that's when communication breaks down. And I have to admit that as in my capacity as mayor, one of my number one goals is to try to unify people, bring people together, and talk things out. And I think it's important as we continue this conversation that we're particularly focused on how we communicate with other individuals. What's going to be successful as a strategy to make a connection with someone and to communicate with someone. So I just want to leave that with you on the very first update. So the second update I wanted to talk about this evening are fireworks and neighborhood councils. For some people, the 4th of July, tomorrow, it is obviously, with the Declaration of Independence in 1776, it is a day of tremendous pride for all Americans. And I have the American flag right behind me. It's a tremendous source of pride and happiness. But for too many people, unfortunately, with this current season of illegal fireworks use here in the city of Oxnard, it is saddening to say that many people are looking forward to the 4th of July coming and the 4th of July going because of this very unsettling trend of the use of ever more powerful, ever louder, and more destructive fireworks. And one of the things that I have attempted to do is share with you the reality that the city has financial constraints. It has a very tight fiscal situation where money is not plentiful. We know, especially due to COVID-19, it's only exacerbated that situation. But at some point, this community, the city council, the city staff, and most importantly, too, the police department, and this community, we're going to have a better dialogue about what we do about fireworks. Because for many people, the idea is, look, I understand that fireworks and this illegal use is going on all around the city, but if I call the police department, I expect them to respond, to my call. And I have come on to this program over the last couple of weeks and asked people to get more involved in their neighborhoods as a means of working and working together with the police department to stem the tide of this phenomena that seems to have swept all across the nation. And one of the things I really want to emphasize is that we need to begin the planning, and that is a coordinated planning between the city council and leadership, the city staff, and the community about what we're going to do now for next year. Because simply put, the police department is, there are not the resources there to stop this problem. If you have 100 or 200 people using fireworks throughout the city, and the police department is going to the scene and responding to some of these calls, and these individuals are nowhere to be seen, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to take our involvement, I would contend. It's going to take the involvement of people in neighborhoods. We're not talking about people getting out of their cars and confronting people. That's the job of the police. We're going to need to do something more to work together with the police department and the city to have a real effect. And we need to start that planning now. And I would contend it's about getting involved in your neighborhood council. There are 47 neighborhood councils in the city of Oxnard. Of those 47, half of them approximately are active. That means that half of the neighborhood councils in the city of Oxnard are not active. They're inactive or they're dormant. And the other half are active. And amongst those that are active, say the 25 that are active, there are maybe 10 that are really active. Ladies and gentlemen, most of these neighborhood councils and then even the Neighborhood Watch program they're not filled with younger people here in the city of Oxnard. It's not that younger people aren't active and don't participate, but they're not filled with younger people. It's predominantly people that are retired. And again, a person can make the argument, well, people that are retired have the time. I think, I worked as a high school teacher for 25 years. I worked multiple jobs so that my wife could stay home and raise our children. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. But even myself, working multiple jobs as a teacher and then working, overtime and working on weekends, I had time to participate in my neighborhood council. There was graffiti in my neighborhood. And it was so unsettling for me that I got involved through the neighborhood council. And it was about strength in numbers, about bringing people together in neighborhoods and taking control of your own neighborhood. And I had an effect. I had a positive effect, not only in the neighborhood council, but so do all of my neighbors. We all participated. And when I say we all, I'd say there were about 30 or 40 of us participating in our neighborhood council. But there are thousands of people that could participate in a neighborhood council, yet we leave it up to maybe 20 or 30 people to do it. And likewise, we leave it up to maybe 10 or 15 police officers on a nightly shift to enforce the fireworks ordinance. We need to become more involved. You need to become more involved in your neighborhood council. And this isn't a lecture. It is a call to action. It is saying, if you want to alter what's happening in your neighborhood, you need to take charge. You need to become involved. And I'll just end on that remark and say that there are two people that I know of right now, and they're going around and they're spending their spare time going around picking up trash and pulling weeds all throughout the city. I mean, it's phenomenal what they're doing. One is Marvin Boos. Many of you know him. He is, I think, he's elderly. And I don't know Marvin's exact age, but he's in great shape by the work he's doing. And another individual by the name of Doug Partello, who I've talked about with helping with the fireworks. These two men are going out there and they're working with others, so I'll acknowledge those others later. They're going out there and they're only asking for trash bags from the city of Oxnard, and they're going out, they're pulling weeds, they're picking up trash, they're taking the bull by the horns. And when people say, Mayor, why isn't the city government picking up that trash? Why aren't they picking up the homeless trash? Why are they not servicing the medians? Why are they not adequately taking care of the landscape maintenance districts? Well, if you've been following the city budget situation, there were massive cuts in those areas. It was either public safety was going to be cut or these landscape maintenance districts and keeping them up to par, the picking up of trash, the servicing of medians. So these individuals have just taken charge, not just in their neighborhoods, they're working all throughout the city. So I use them as a shining example about individuals that are part of the solution. They see that there's obviously a challenge, there's a problem, and they're becoming involved. And they're not just involved in their neighborhoods, they're involved throughout the city. So I'm saying that in a very positive way, and I hope it's an uplifting way to say, if you want to see change in this city, you need to get involved. There's just no way about it. You need to come to city council meetings. You need to fill out a speaker card. While we're during lockdown with COVID-19, you go to the oxnard.org and go to government and then down to all meetings. Fill out a speaker card. You need to address the city council. You need to volunteer for the many citizen advisory groups in this city. And we know that those cities that have the largest volunteer corps are the cities that have the highest standards and the highest quality of life. So this evening on the subject of fireworks, I just want to leave that food for thought for next year. Get involved in your neighborhood council. And I talked about the fact if you go to oxnard.org/neighborhoods, you can find out who the chair is of your neighborhood council and send that chair an email. Find out when your next meeting is. Encourage the chair to have a Zoom meeting during this COVID-19 stay-at-home order. So update number 3 is the latest on COVID-19. And unfortunately, this is the very first time that I haven't had up-to-date statistics, but the statistics that I have are very concerning. The city of Oxnard, as of Wednesday, July 1st, at approximately 5:30 p.m., had 1,081 cases, positive cases of COVID-19. And of course, many of those individuals have recovered. That's out of 3,240 in Ventura County, and there have been 47 deaths. Oxnard's percentage of the county total is 33%, so exactly 1/3 of the total of the county of Ventura. And you might recall that at the very beginning of COVID-19, Oxnard was hovering around 20%, 23%. Now it's up to 33%. There was an article in the Star recently or reported by several magazines and news publications that farm workers were recently infected. I want to say that that is being attended to, but the fact of the matter is that we're very lucky here in the city of Oxnard that it hasn't been worse, because as I said last week, we have the 7th highest person household count, not in the county, not in the state, but in the nation. And it's not uncommon, out of the 15 most overcrowded household conditions in the country, 10 out of 15, 2/3 of them are in the state of California. And right here in the city of Oxnard is that situation. And it particularly affects communities that have large migrant populations. And again, you might have one family living in one room and another family living in another room because they can only afford a $750, $700 a month rent. So it's particularly important that we're practicing social distancing, we're wearing the mask, and we're washing our hands. Beaches. There's a hard closure as of this morning at 5 a.m. until 5 a.m. Monday morning. A hard closure of the beach. It's not meaning the soft closure is where people are allowed to go and exercise at the beach, walk along the beach. There's a hard closure on the beach because the 4th of July traditionally is a time and Memorial Day, where the most people go to the beach. There's simply not the manpower or women power, just people power, to oversee thousands of people coming to the beach. And it wasn't just because residents of the beach said close the beaches. It's a very important prerogative of local government to make sure that during this COVID-19 pandemic, that out of all the things that we need to avoid are the gatherings of larger groups of people. So there is a hard closure of those beaches. They'll reopen on Monday, and it makes us appreciate the fact that we live here on the coast and we want to enjoy the beach. I want to enjoy the beach, and I know you do too. Bars, wineries, and restaurants are also closed unless they serve food and or have outdoor facilities. So these are all recent changes as the state has faced, once again, a surge. So tonight, I wanted to base the main part of the program on something I started last week, which is about rebuilding Oxnard's economy, especially in light of COVID-19. And I want to focus this evening in particular on youth and on what seems to be, for too many people, families here in Ventura County, families in Oxnard, what I would call the elusive American dream. There's not one of us here in this country that doesn't support the concept of the American dream. What's the American dream? The American dream is owning a home. Ventura County has the 7th or 8th, it fluctuates, most expensive real estate market in the United States. And owning a home, as we know, is very difficult. And for that reason, many of us have children that will have to live with us long enough to where maybe they can save a down payment, or if parents were to have the resources to help their children get a home, it's very expensive to live here. Ventura County, ladies and gentlemen, has had 5 years in a row where the economic growth has remained at 0 or has been negative, while the rest of the state has prospered over the last 5 or 10 years. You know, the state of California, according to the Milken Institute study, and I'll show that to you here in a second, and that's just a little bit, you can read about that online. California in 2017 had the fifth largest economy in the world. So ahead of Great Britain, ahead of France, $2.5 trillion economy. And not only does California have a $2.5 trillion economy, it was attributed from 2007 to 2017 that America's prosperity and its economic expansion, this unprecedented period of economic expansion, was led by the state of California. So then what's the problem? There are 58 counties in the state of California. What is happening here in Ventura County? Why is Ventura County lagging behind many of the others? Well, one of the very first things that the Milken Institute study concludes, and this again is called Preparing California for a Future of Work. And it says here, creating equity by addressing the access gap. And when we're talking today about some of the issues with the panel discussion in this so-called conversation, we know that poverty, we know that income gaps have something to do with the problems and the challenges that we face in this nation. So what's going on here in Ventura County that is something that needs to be attended to, and how is it particularly relevant to youth? So what I'd like to do is just focus very quickly. As many of you might know, I spent 25 years as a high school teacher. And one of the things that I felt was really important is that my students do community service and or do internships. And I wanted them to have the practical experience of going out and serving the community. In fact, I offered it as an extra credit, and for seniors, and if any of my former seniors are listening to it, they probably dreaded it, but instead of writing a research paper, I would give them the option of doing 20 hours of community service. But that really does speak to the fact that what we need here in Ventura County and what really is lacking is we need to be focused on the jobs. What are the jobs that the Milken Institute study is predicting here in the future that are going to be available? Because we know by 2030, 2040, I think it's 2040, in the next 20 years, that close to half of all the current jobs are no longer going to be available. So what this Milken study does, and I'm sorry sometimes about showing you this here, but what it shows here and it highlights is it talks about the industries and the jobs that are going to be needed the most. And I want to relate this here to younger people here in Oxnard and in Ventura County. So the number one demand is going to be in healthcare. So from 2016 to 2026, okay, there's going to be a demand for over 500,000 healthcare workers, 545,000 healthcare workers. The 10-year estimate of completion of either job training or degrees to meet this demand is 3,990. I was absolutely dumbfounded by that statistic. So we need over 500,000, okay, healthcare workers, yet individuals that are preparing now for the healthcare industry are just under 4,000. And that is a gap of 541,000 positions. And one of the things I've said right here, if we're going to talk about the possibilities of local schools and what they might be able to offer, the Oxnard Union High School District is building a brand new state-of-the-art school off of Rose Avenue in Camino del Sol. And I have forwarded the idea that as of the many components that they're looking at to offer at that school, that they should offer an academy specific to healthcare. Now, there is a healthcare academy at Pacifica High School, and I think it's yielded some very good results. But ladies and gentlemen, if we have a gap of over 500,000 jobs where the job training and the education is not meeting those needs, we got to be particularly focused on that. So not far from where this proposed high school, or where the high school is going to be built, it's no longer proposed, it's going to be built off of Camino del Sol and Rose Avenue, is one of the largest medical corridors in Ventura County, right off of Gonzales Road. First and foremost, St. John's Hospital. And then all the way up to Rice Avenue are all of those medical office buildings and doctors, etc. We need to do the best we possibly can to get younger people right here in this city. many of whom the middle class dream will not be possible for them. They're going to have to move out of Ventura County. They're going to have to move to the inland part of the state, Lancaster, Palmdale, Bakersfield, who knows, where housing costs and the cost of living is half of what it is here in Ventura County. The second industry that offers this possibility of real potential is energy, construction, and utilities. And in the energy, construction, and utilities, it's 158,000 jobs. Now, it's saying here that there's actually a surplus in that area. So when we talk about energy in particular, I think some of you might know that oil and natural gas, that they're out of all the counties in the state of California that produce oil and natural gas, Kern County is first with oil, LA County is second, and Ventura County is third. And as I've talked about before on these broadcasts, it's about a diversification of energy, ladies and gentlemen, that we need. And we know, and even the energy industry, the oil industry, the natural gas industry, they know the writing's on the wall. We have a situation where we need to transition and begin that transition to these diversified and alternative forms of energy. But we can't ignore the fact that our economy is so dependent right now on these jobs. How are we going to train workers is what's the key question here. How are we going to train younger people right here in Oxnard and in Ventura County to get ready for these futuristic jobs? You know, in the Ventura County Star recently, there was an article on a Tesla battery storage facility that's going to be off of Vineyard Avenue. Phenomenal project. We need more projects like that. We need more clean energy projects. But at the same time, we know that the natural gas industry and the oil industry has very high standards that they have to meet and should meet. And those standards are improving all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, some of those jobs are paying up to $100,000 a year. We need to make sure that as we make the transition away from fossil fuels, right, to these alternative and diversified forms of energy, we need to make sure that the jobs that students and younger people are being trained for are going to pay equal salaries. So I'm just giving an example. If someone who works on an oil platform or works on an oil lease right here in Ventura County is paid $80,000 or $100,000 a year, and a job installing solar panels, as an example, which is definitely part of the wave of the future, only pays $30,000 a year, right? That's not an adequate transfer. That's not going to do anything to keep younger people here and employed and give them the kind of wages that they need to stay employed right here in Ventura County. So that discussion about energy, I think, is a very important one. It shouldn't be either or. It shouldn't be all or nothing. It's about how we're going to make a transition and about the diversification of energy, both natural gas and oil. We have no coal. Coal, as we know, is the dirtiest of all the fossil fuels. Then comes oil, then comes natural gas. How are we going to make that transition? How are we going to train younger people to assume those jobs? Next, let's see here, is business and entrepreneurship. You know, that is what makes America great. Starting businesses, entrepreneurship. And you know something? That's where local government has a special role in facilitating the growth and the expansion of businesses and entrepreneurship. And one of the things I reported this last 2 weeks, I believe, is that one of the things that's come out of COVID-19 is that the city and the county have seen an increase in individuals filing for new business licenses because as a result of COVID-19 and the ever-evolving circumstances, many more businesses and many more entrepreneurs are trying to get their start. Also, finally, digital media information and communications technology. We know exactly what I'm doing here is along those areas. That in itself, those jobs are 131,000 jobs over the next 10 or 15 years. However, only 21,000 people are currently getting in the state of California training for those positions. 21,000, and we have a demand that's around 130,000. So what programs, you know, Ventura, great high school, Foothill Tech. You know, it is a magnet school. Many of you know I've been promoting magnet schools for the city of Oxnard. There is the first magnet magnet program. It's a STEM program, science, technology. It's actually a STEAM program, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, with a real school district right there at River Park. We need to get more of these magnet programs, ladies and gentlemen, in our schools. And when it comes to community colleges, I've mentioned the fact that the current Oxnard College president, a very visionary man, is working right now with the city to better identify the needs of local businesses and what skills do younger people need to be successful and to assume these jobs. Remember what the objective is. Do we want our children living here in Ventura County, or do we want them to have to move to Los Angeles, San Diego, or the Bay Area, where a lot of these higher paying jobs have clustered? Do we want them leaving here, or for that matter, moving to the interior of the state of California because they can't afford to live here? And I think for all of us, the answer is no. We don't want our kids leaving this area. We want them staying right here. We want them working. So I think that the county in particular is in an excellent position, and the city of Oxnard working with the county. We need to bring all the school districts under one roof and one meeting, and that again might be during COVID-19, a virtual meeting. We need, as part of the current plan for the County of Ventura, which was devised in 2017, the Strategic Resiliency Plan for Economic Growth in Ventura County, we need to bring those schools all under one umbrella through county leadership, through city leadership, and we really need to do a check to see whether or not the programs for training for younger people are going to meet the demands and the needs for these jobs. And I have to end by also saying, when it comes to construction and it comes with the trades, those jobs are just as much in demand as they've ever been. And there are, with many of the trade unions, there are apprenticeship programs. I believe they last up to 3 years with these apprenticeship programs where an individual's trained to be a plumber, trained to be an electrician, trained to with construction, trained to be a steel worker. We need to find a way to better partner with those unions, better partner with cities to get those job training programs for our younger people right here in the city of Oxnard. So I just want to conclude, and then I'm going to see if I have any time here for questions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, I've gotten carried away once again. I just want to conclude by saying that tomorrow is a very special day. And we think tomorrow of the 4th of July, but I don't know how often we think about the Declaration of Independence. And there's a great story. And I don't know how you're going to take this story, but I think it's a very important one. And I think it's very fitting for the 4th and the celebration of the greatness of this country and the American people, that we need to do better. We can do better. We're Americans. We can do anything we set our minds to. And when I think about the Founding Fathers, and I think about after the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, it was Benjamin Franklin who said, well, if we don't hang together, we're going to hang separately. And I think those words of wisdom by Benjamin Franklin apply to us today. Are we going to hang together? Are we going to unite as Americans, as residents of the city of Oxnard? Are we going to continue to divide ourselves? And we see that division does not serve us well. We've seen that one of the greatest talents that the American people have is their ability to compromise. And we saw what happened in the 1860s, what happened when the American people, when it came to the issue of slavery, refused to compromise, were unable to compromise. We had the bloodiest of all conflicts in the history of this country, the Civil War. So as a parting thought for the 4th of July, celebrate the 4th of July with your family. Be proud to be an American. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a time where we're being tested. We need to come together, we need to unite, and we need to make Oxnard a leader of this economy in Ventura County and rebuild for the future. Rebuild, reinvest, and revitalize. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and God bless America.